Hello, everyone. Friends, colleagues, fellow journalists. Well, I don't know about you, but I have to repeat it to myself again and again, like a mantra. And I think it's important to go over it once more. So, for journalists to do their job, they must, first and foremost, be free to do so. They must have the freedom to write and film stories of public interest. They should have access to public information and documents, and the right to protect their sources must be respected. They should be led to expose crime and corruption, report on atrocities and war. Journalists should do what they are meant to do, serve the right of the public to know the truth, and hold those in power accountable. And journalists should do that without fear, free from censorship and media capture, free from legal intimidation, prosecution, slams, or illegal surveillance, and free from personal and physical threats or police violence. However, this is not the case today. Press freedom is under attack not only in authoritarian regimes, as we might expect, but also in democratic nations, including in the land that gave birth to printed press, Europe. Violations of press freedom have become a systematic strategy, even in countries where the fight for liberty is deeply rooted in their history. It happens also here, in Greece, a country that we proudly call, as the Greeks, the birthplace of democracy, using this term also for our country's global branding. In just a few moments, 6 European journalists from Slovakia, France, Serbia, Hungary, Italy, and Greece will take the stage to share their stories, to tell us how their right to practice journalism in Europe has been violated. But before we begin, it's important to remember that, like all fundamental freedoms, the threat against press freedom affects people's lives. And this is what makes it such an urgent matter. After the 6 journalists that we're going to hear right now, we're going to have a very special panel of experts to talk about press freedom in Europe today. But first, please, the journalists should take the floor. Thank you.
I'm Beata Balogová. I am a journalist and an editor-in-chief from Slovakia. I have been a journalist for 30 years, but even cumulatively, I have never experienced so much hate and verbal attacks as I am experiencing now. I've been called prostitutes, flock of George Soros swines, and traitor. Robert Fico, who was shot, survived his assassination, and right after his recovery, he blamed independent media for that attack. It even culminated the attacks further. A man who wanted to cremate me because of my Jewish roots is now at court. But it's not only hate and verbal attacks that is plugging press freedom in our country. Fico follows the Orbán handbook of media capture, and he successfully captured public service media. Even the remaining good journalists are leaving that institution. I'm getting CVs from them every week. Robert Fico is also threatening and putting pressure on private broadcasters for their critical formats. He is telling the investors that he would cut state advertisement for their channels. So another pillar of free journalism is crumbling, which is even more dangerous that he's legitimizing conspiracy sites as legal journalists. One of his ministers, the interior minister, gave an interview to a neo-Nazi who runs a website and is hiding in Great Britain. These sites are often sponsored by Russian sources, but he's not talking to us, legitimate journalists, and he tells the public that we are paid by foreign forces. He's even pondering to take over and adopt a law on foreign agents so that he can punish us journalists. I think that even though Slovakia seems a small and not that important country, but it is the biggest test of the European Union on how the Union is able to protect its own values and on all claims, its own claims about press freedom when it comes to Slovakia. Because if Slovakia is able to reproduce Viktor Orbán's takeover of media, then any other autocrat in any other country can. Thank you for your attention.
I have one. Hi, my name is Ariane Lavrieux. I'm a French journalist. I'm working for Disclose, which is a non-profit investigative media in France. I'm here because a year ago, 9 intelligence officers woke me up. It was 6 a.m. And they raided my flat and told me I was being placed in custody. A judge was with them and told me, well, you must know why we are here, so give us the documents we are looking for, it will be quicker. Well, I said, you can't break into my home, demand my sources, that's a bit insane. The tone is not really genuine, but you get the idea. In fact, I was wrong. In France, it's legal. You, journalist, you can be spied on, you can be arrested up to 96 hours if the judge thinks it's necessary, if they claim there is a so-called overriding public interest. So I was half lucky because I was detained only 40 hours. Intelligence officer had the Israeli software Celebrite and used it on my computer, phones, and hard drives. They extracted my data, emails, even took some page of my notebooks. So the story that triggered such craziness from the French authorities is a story we published in 2021 with Disclose. We revealed that French intelligence had been used by Egypt for extrajudicial killings on the border of Libya. Civilians were killed with the secret support of the French army. The story is called Egypt Papers, if you want to check. So in short, we revealed that an anti-terrorism operation had been diverted from its original objective, and the guys who were arresting me were also diverted from their core mission, which was to stop terrorist attack. In a way, they proved my point. So now I'm free, but I can be interrogating again, I can be indicted, my newsroom could be searched because the police investigation may be still ongoing. Not only Disclose, but any journalist in France is at risk when they investigate on confidential military issue. The penalty is up to 5 years in jail. 2 months ago, a journalist was arrested and detained overnight because she was covering a protest against a military company that sold weapons to Israel. France is the European country that have arrested, interrogated, and put under surveillance the highest number of journalists, according to Media Freedom Rapid Response, which is like 30% in the last couple of years. My time is out, so I just want to emphasize also that France is one of the countries that pushed for the use of spyware against journalists. We lost this battle, sadly. Now we can use spyware against journalists in more than 30 types of police investigation in Europe, according to the Media Freedom Act. We lost that battle, but I hope that this conference will be an occasion to learn from each other, from how we can fight back and reclaim our right to information and freedom of the press in Europe. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Bojana Jovanovic. I'm Deputy Editor-in-Chief at CRIC, investigative media from Serbia. We are covering organized crime and high corruption, and because of that, of course, as you imagine, we have a lot of problems with the Serbian government and Serbian president. So over the years, we are facing a lot of pressure from the government, but currently the biggest pressure, the biggest problem we have are slaps. So now my newsroom, myself and my colleagues, we have 16 ongoing court cases in which we are trying to defend independent and investigative journalism and journalism that is fact-based. Because, as you know, all those slaps are issued by the people who are close to the government. In our case, we even have a minister that sued us, a judge, that is, I think, the first time in Serbian history such case, and people who are really close, like inner circle of Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić. The slaps are not just a problem that CRIC is facing, but also the other colleagues from other investigative and independent media. And the aim of the government basically is to shut down any critical, any independent and any investigative media and word and journalism, because what they did so far, and I heard colleague from Slovakia, and unfortunately the situation is the same in Serbia, the government and the ruling party, they are controlling all mainstream media. So there are just a few free media left, and with slaps they are trying to shut us down and to silence us all. Slaps are a really big issue, and in Serbia particularly because we have a judiciary that is really politically controlled. We have captured institutions. So basically, we cannot hope that we can win this battle alone. So that's why we are asking and getting a lot of support. And in this battle, we need to unite. And that's what we are actually currently doing also in Serbia, not just like internationally. So I hope that there will be enough time to maybe talk about that a little bit later. Thank you.
It's a real honor to be here. I'm Szabolcs Panyi, an investigative journalist from Hungary. And I guess the personal story that I'm about to share resonates with a lot of Greek colleagues. I guess I've been invited to be here because I was one of the victims of the so-called Pegasus spyware surveillances in Hungary. And I was also fortunate to join the so-called Pegasus project, this team of investigative journalists who uncovered abuses with this Israeli spyware. What we uncovered back in Hungary, working for Direct 36, which is a small non-profit investigative outlet, is that when we matched this leaked database of phone numbers that were targeted with this very sophisticated Israeli spyware, we matched this database to our own contact list to see if some of those numbers pop up in our own phones. The colleague that works next to me has his next desk to me, András Szabó's phone number also popped up, so we immediately figured out that out of 8 people working in Hungary as investigative journalists, mostly uncovering Russian influence, Kremlin influence, dark money flowing into Hungary from the east. Out of these 8 people, 2 had this sophisticated spyware on our phones. And of course, as Beata mentioned, the Orban playbook, the Orban role model that's being copied by other leaders in Europe is much more sophisticated than the Kremlin playbook. It's not aggressive, it's not brutal, it's sophisticated, it's cunning, but in some ways it's even more effective. They put spywares on our phones because they want to figure out who are our sources, who are those brave people who help us with our investigations, who leak documents to us, who give tips to us. And of course, they want to figure out if they can find any dirt on us so that they can leak to the pro-government propaganda press and then smear us. They didn't find anything on me. My phone was hacked for a 7-month period. But what did happen, obviously, is regardless of a journalist is spied on with a spyware or not. We are becoming targets of smear campaigns, hate campaigns, copy-pasting again, the Kremlin playbook, and now we see the same thing going on in Georgia as well. There's basically a Russia-style foreign agent law, which created an institution that is tasked with hunting foreign agents. And guess what? These foreign agents are exclusively non-profit journalists, investigative journalists, and people working for NGOs who are trying to uncover corruption. Thank you for listening to me, and again, an honor to be here. Thank you.
I am an Italian journalist. My name is Alberto Spampinato. My brother, Giovanni, elder of 3 years for me, was assassinated in Sicily in 1972. He was a reporter for the daily newspaper of Palermo, L'Ora, and he had unveiled that in this southeast corner of Sicily, some extreme right group secretly was carrying out military training for their adherents. This group had weapons, explosives, and were linked with the people suspected of the 1969 terrorist attack in Rome and Milan, Piazza Fontana. Moreover, they were linked to the regime of colonel that at the time was ruling in Greece. With some dynamic of the assassination on my brother, in Italy have been killed since 1960 to 1993 other 10 journalists. The dynamic is very clear. Before, they suffer of pressure, then of charges for abusive charges, for defamation, specious criminal proceeding, then there are threats and retaliation. In a memory of my brother, a group of journalists 15 years ago founded an observatory called Oxygen for Information to monitor all the non-fatal incidents like that happen in Italy. Since there, we have documented 7,000 of these incidents, each one by name, and make it public with many details. That has unveiled attention. We made a proposal of measures to counteract this trend, but nothing has been made now. In Italy, we have a very worrying situation, you know. Since 2 years, we are ruling a new right-wing government led by Giorgia Meloni. What has happened in these 2 years, as we have detected by our observatory. In these 2 years, we detected other thousands of this incident. The trend about the number, the dimension, is the sum of the precedent years. But there are inside 2 relevant changes. Less journalists denounced reported formally to the law enforcement the threatened suffered. Second, there are more intimidation and slaps coming from a political and governmental level. And from here, there are also more attempts to minimize or blame the journalist. We have many things to do, and we think that we should do more to merge the experience we have made in Italy, in France, in Hungary, Slovakia, and other countries to face this very worrying situation.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Thanas Koukakis. I'm a Greek financial editor. I became known 2 years ago as the first European victim of the predator spyware. Those 2 years have been extremely interesting because we managed, through our collaboration with domestic and foreign news media, to make our story, my story, known, and to reverse the sequence, meaning that we managed to stop an authoritarian behavior, that the one is to follow and surveil journalists through spywares, and we became the predator, meaning that we managed, through our collaboration with the domestic and foreign journalists, to make known the Idalexa, the company that produced the predator spyware, the protagonist of this scandal, meaning the people that the merchant produce and use the predator spyware in order to put under surveillance journalists, members of the civil society, politicians, and entrepreneurs. And through this sequence of the event, we were able to put Idalexa, the company that is behind this, this power, to international sanctions and to minimize the effect, a kind of this proliferation. So the message I would like to send today is that through collaboration and through the proliferation of our job, we can really exercise our control and to serve our institutional role in order to minimize the authoritarian behaviors that even in Greece are more than profound. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for sharing your stories, for traveling to Athens to do that. It's very important to us. Your role has not stopped here. In the conversation and the discussion that will follow, we will try and have questions, and there's going to be a Q&A that follows, so you will be involved in that. So even though some European countries like Norway, Denmark, and Sweden top the press freedom RSF index, however, as a whole, the situation in Europe seems to be getting worse during the past decade, as you can see on the map behind me. So what is going wrong? To answer that, I would like to invite Elena Rodina, Coordinator of Media Freedom Rapid Response at the ECPMF, European Center for Press and Media Freedom. Julie Majerjak, representative to the EU at the Reporters Without Borders, and of course, Scott Griffin, Interim Executive Director at the International Press Institute, IPI. Thank you so much for being here today with us. So I think we have like a good idea about some of the worst things that can happen to journalists, but and we also saw the map of the RSF just a few seconds ago, Julie, but I would like to start with Elena. As the MFRR recently published the most recent report about the press freedom in Europe. So could you tell us a little bit more about that, Elena?
Yes, thank you. To go back. Okay. We published our report. It's an interim report from January to June 2024. So it's very, very recent. We published it literally a couple of weeks ago. And it already demonstrates an increase in threats against journalists. So for the same period of the last year, there were 654 alerts on our mapping media freedom. And in this interim report, we already have 756 violations. So it's pretty much 100 more. And what also we can say about this report, what are the trends? The trends are unfortunately quite worrying. So we can say that most common type of violations is intimidation and threatening of journalists. And the second most common is blocked journalistic activity, which means that journalists are being prevented or obstructed from reporting or from accessing information. And also there are already more than 100 physical attacks that have been documented. And just a few words on some of the trends that we noticed that are really of some big concern. First of all, there is a very troubling increase in governmental interference and public officials and government being the perpetrators. In the EU, there is an increase. It's the second most common perpetrator after private individual. And also, the similar number of this kind of perpetrator has been reported already in the first 6 months of this year than in full year 2023. So think about it. It's really quite interesting, right? And also, another trend is the increase in anti-media laws and legislations, spoofing, basically involving AI in targeting journalists. And we had a lot of elections this year, and unfortunately, around elections time, journalists were increasingly attacked, their freedoms were suppressed, and they were targeted.
So from what I can see here, first of all, I can see a new term, spoofing, right? I would like you to tell us a little bit more what is this. And also, I can see that media capture by the political state, by the political authorities, is increasing. As well as slaps, I guess, because if the laws change and allow it, this will lead to an increase to that. And also, I would like you to tell us if there is any countries in your scope lately with the MFRR that, let's say, ring a bell about that.
Okay, I will try to answer in a brief manner. That's a lot to unpack, and sadly, a lot of countries are getting much worse on our press and media freedom. I will briefly answer spoofing. As you can see, it is kind of a new term, and it's using new technology, using the AI to target journalists, to generate deepfake content, and basically to threaten and undermine the work of the independent media and journalists. And this is going to only increase. This is a growing trend, so I believe if you watch out for our final yearly report and for the next reports, I think this is going to take the central stage. And this is something that we should be concerned and worried about. Regarding the countries, yes, many countries, and even including those we didn't expect to have this increase in threats and pressures against journalists, they show worse results in this first half year. I can speak a little bit about countries that we've been to on missions to. So MFRR organizes fact-finding and advocacy missions to countries that concern us most. So I personally have been on a mission to Romania. And in Romania, there is a serious concern of media capture. And particularly, there is a very big lack of transparency of allocating governmental funds to political parties. And through these political parties, providing advertising political advertising in the media. This political advertising, it takes basically governmental money, state money. It's many, many millions. I think this year it was, in 2023, it was 24 million euros. And then this funded are allocated to media and propaganda. It's a formal name of that designation. And there is a lack of transparency as to what media are getting this money and what is actually advertising, what is not. So it is not marked really, and there is like no disclosure of that. And this is, of course, of a serious concern, especially when it's a super election year and there are lots of elections going on. So.
Sure. So I don't know if there is another slide that we can.
Just the final slide to direct you to our report. And also I would like to say that if you're interested in our report and how it was produced, on Monday, on the 30th of September, we will have a live webinar at 2 p.m. You can also find it on the MP4R platform, and you can join, you can ask questions to our monitoring team who have been working really hard to produce this report. So please come, and you can find all the details.
Thank you very much, Elena. And as we said, MFRR focuses on Europe, but the Reporters Sans Frontières expand all over the world, Julie. So would you be able to give us like a context? Where is Europe now, right now, in comparison with other countries in the world in terms of press freedom violations?
Yes. Well, as Elena said, and as we heard from the journalist, there is a deterioration of the situation in the EU and more broadly in Europe. But yes, it's important to put it into perspective because despite these setbacks, Europe remains the region in the world where press freedom is best protected. And we also have to keep that in mind. In fact, all the countries where press freedom can be considered as good, you can see there is the map of our index. So good is where the countries are green, and they are all in Europe, and more specifically within the European Union. Currently, there are 584 journalists in prison globally, and none of them are in the EU. This is also an important indicator. In some places outside Europe, a tweet can send you in prison for years. That said, this doesn't mean that Europe is without its challenges. Press freedom is under pressure in Hungary, in Malta, and in Greece, for example. They are the three lowest ranked countries among the EU countries in our World Press Freedom Index. We also hear that since the return of Robert Fico, the situation in Slovakia is worrying, but I will not develop on EU countries. The latest World Press Freedom Index shows that the worst situation for journalists is in the North Africa, Middle East region. Half of the country are classified as having very, very serious press freedom problem. Places like Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Palestine, Iraq, Bahrain, Syria, Egypt are among these very problematic countries. Next, we have the Asia-Pacific region, where journalism is suffocating under the weight of authoritarian governments. 5 countries are among the world's 10 most dangerous countries for journalists: Myanmar, China, North Korea, Vietnam, and Afghanistan. And then we can move to the sub-Saharan Africa, which is a region affected by political violence. And finally, a word about the Americas, where the main problem is covering subjects related to organized crime, corruption, or environment. Mexico continues to be the most dangerous country for journalists. 37 were killed in 2019. In South America, press freedom has worsened significantly, especially with the rise of leaders hostile to the media, like in Argentina, with the newly elected president Javier Milei, who shut down the country's biggest news agency.
Thank you very much, Julie, for traveling with us around the world. But I would like to go back to Europe a little bit, because you mentioned something that was very important. I think that the best countries, let's say, in terms of press freedom, are part of the European Union. And this is something, maybe this is a good time also to make a disclaimer and talk maybe about the elephant in the room, Scott and Elena, which is Ukraine, Turkey, and Russia. The two latter countries are considered geographically sometimes part of Europe. However, they are totally exceptional cases. They require very special attention, and apparently, as we all know, they face very specific challenges. However, I would like a comment, Elena, maybe from your missions and your research with the MFRR. What do you see there, very briefly, in Ukraine, for example?
Well, I would say that, of course, it is also very high on the number of attacks against journalists, but that's a completely different case because it's an ongoing war there, so they are working inside the war zone. So, of course, it's extremely challenging, but, you know, it's a different kind of perspective altogether, a different kind of setting.
And if we would like Scott to say just one thing about Russia and Turkey, which of course are very big topics.
Sure. I mean, IPI has been actually tracking attacks on journalists in Russia and Ukraine since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. We have a Ukraine War Press Freedom Tracker, and we've actually counted over 1,500 different forms of attacks on journalists in Russia and Ukraine. Most of the attacks in Ukraine are on journalists, are against journalists who were covering the war and result from, you know, Russian forces and Russian authorities. But within Russia, obviously, also we had a massive crackdown on the independent media, including basically the expulsion of independent media from Russia and the continued harassment of journalists there. And of course, journalists in Ukraine continue to work in extremely dangerous situations, and we're monitoring those attacks, although we've also seen an uptick in Ukraine in forms of domestic pressure on journalists, including surveillance and intimidation of independent journalists in Ukraine by the domestic authorities. So it's a really challenging media environment in both countries, for different reasons.
Of course. So let's get back to Europe once more. And Elena also mentioned a few kind of challenges for press freedom. And I would like, if you could help me, Scott, also to narrow them down. What are the most important challenges with your insights at the International Press Institute? Is it physical attacks? Is it like digital attacks and cyber attacks? Is it media capture, illegal surveillance, slaps? What do you think is the trend that worries you the most?
I think it's a really toxic mix of quite a few different things, and I think if we sort of bring together everything, all the testimonies that we heard from the journalists at the beginning and what we already heard from Elena and Julie, I think we can actually talk about a multi-pronged attack on press freedom in Europe. And, you know, we have, on the one hand, and these attacks, I think, are focused on undermining the critical media as the fourth estate and trying to undermine the ability of critical media to do their job and be a check on power. We have, on the one hand, different forms of attacking the credibility of independent media. We heard a lot about these organized smear campaigns, which are targeting journalists and which are horrible. And they are being driven in many cases by politicians who don't want the scrutiny that comes from media, and they're being replicated by, in some cases, by the followers of these politicians. So we heard the testimony, for example, from Slovakia. But we also have organized attempts to undermine the independence of media on a broader scale, and those are the issues of media capture. This is, for example, various forms of the Orban playbook to manipulate the media landscape and the media market to weaken the conditions that allow independent media to exist. So we see, for example, the abuse of state resources to, let's say, feed pro-government media with advertising money and starve independent media of advertising money. We see turning what should be independent regulatory bodies into basically extended arms of the government, and they again stack the deck against independent media. You see public broadcasters turning into propaganda broadcasters, and you see different forms of again, trying to exert control over private media through friendly oligarchs and that type of thing. You also see different forms of what I would call attacks on the institutional viability of media. So I think slaps in some ways fall into that category. So it's not just about threatening journalists with jail. It's also about burdening media outlets with time they need to spend defending these cases, with money they need to spend defending these cases when they could be doing journalism. And I think it's also, we've also seen a big uptick in cyber attacks on journalism, on media houses, which I think fall into a similar category. It's a huge burden on resources, and it takes away from what journalists should be doing, which is sharing news with the public.
Let's discuss a little bit about slaps, because it seems like it's a topic that comes around again and again. What is exactly a slap, let's say? Elena.
I can start. SLAP is a strategic litigation against public participation, and it can target activists, it can target public activists and also journalists. In this case, journalists and media outlets are being targeted by the SLAPs in many countries, and this is kind of a legal, so to say, way to silence the journalist or media outlet. Because usually SLAPs, how are they different from regular legal lawsuits? They are typically, the litigator knows that likely he or she or they won't win in the end. It is the very process of dragging a journalist through this very expensive, lengthy court procedure, and over again, distracting the journalists from working, from actually reporting, from producing news, from their work, and going to court, fighting against these lawsuits. And it's very expensive, it's exhausting, and it also creates a chilling effect. Ultimately, it silences journalists because they say, I don't want that in my life, I'd rather not write about this then. So it leads to self-censorship and silencing.
Actually, what exactly you said was a question I wanted to ask the rest of the journalists who just shared with us their stories. For example, Bojana has already told us that she has been facing with Greek, with her media outlet, slaps. Thanasis is another case as well. And may I also add Ariane to this, because I think her type of the intimidation you have faced, Ariane, is also a kind of disencouraging journalists to go forward. So if you have any comments, Bojana, Thanasis, or Ariane, we would love to hear you. And my question basically would be what just Elena said. If you think that after this experience, you have changed the way you worked, like self-censored yourself in a way. You could stand up if you want. Sorry.
Okay, yeah. I can say that it affects the work because
we need to, as you said, spend a lot of time, preparing for court, talking with a lawyer, collecting evidence. Then it's a lot of stress when you go to the court and when you are being asked by judge, by lawyers. They're trying sometimes to humiliate you, and it's not a pleasant thing. But also, what we know, for example, we became more conservative when we are writing the stories. For example, earlier we didn't send each story to the lawyer. Now we are doing that because we know that it's safer for us if the lawyer goes through the story, which basically kind of changes, and we need more time prior to publishing because involving lawyers means a lot of time spending on that. But what we, on the other hand, what we do, we are trying to do whatever we can to show those people who sued us that we are not afraid and that they will not stop us from reporting. So the first thing we do, we continue investigating those people and we continue publishing stories about them, although we know that they will sue us over that story again. But that's just the way we need to fight back, basically. What also we do, we report from our trials. So we kind of are trying to find journalism ways of fighting back. So we report from each trial because we want our readers to know what's going on in the courtroom because, not other media don't report about this because it's like one small case against Greek. So we are publishing the news, and I think that's important because the judges are behaving one way when there is no public, and when they know that nobody will report what's going on in the courtroom, and they are behaving differently when there is public. The third thing we are doing, like just two more remarks. Third thing we are doing now, we have like foreign observers. Representatives of international non-profit organization, media organization.
Lack of speakers today.
Those people, they're coming to our trials. So, they are firsthand, they can see what's going on, how the judge behaves, because judges are like really funny. They know to behave in a really strange ways when they have minister in the courtroom. So we have foreign observers, and now we have we created an association with other media in Serbia who are under slaps. So we are fighting together. We are we are sharing solidarity. So other journalists are coming to our trials. We are going and reporting from their trials, and we will do also together collaboration on investigation the people who are suing us or them.
So I guess journalists should share know-how about slaps nowadays.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Bojana. I don't know if anyone else from our audience, from the 6 journalists who are sitting in the front row, would like to comment. I would have to say that also in Greece, it kind of has begun to become a very common practice, slaps. And we have also recently the cases of Stavroula Lapoulimeni and Reporters United as well. So maybe we should move on and see what Europe and what the authorities, what solution could we have to that, and mention about the European Media Freedom Act. And Julia, would like your comment about what is the EMFA, and also say that it includes some special, let's say, new set of laws about slaps. So is there hope?
So that's 2 different things. You have the European Media Freedom Act since May. It's the first legislation on media freedom at EU level. And apart from that, there is also anti-slap directive. It was quite difficult to have this directive on slap because of the division of the competences between member states and the EU. So I think it's a first step. It's a signal, a good signal to have this directive. Unfortunately, maybe the scope is not broad enough because in some domestic cases, it will be hard to apply, even if the Commission recommended to the member state to apply the same provision for domestic, for national SLAPs. So if a member state is willing to fight against SLAP, they can do it. But I think it's still a good signal. And then we have the European Media Freedom Act, who's also, I think, a significant and necessary step. The idea there is to safeguard media pluralism and independence within the EU. It includes provision to protect editorial independence within a newsroom, prevent political interference, regulate media concentration. There's also some provision for a fair allocation of state advertisement, which we know can be very problematic, or a tool to favor friendly media. There's also provision to prevent intrusive surveillance of journalists, but here I think we can have a debate of what is in the European Media Freedom Act and is it enough. There's also provision to prevent abusive moderation of media content online by platforms. It's not perfect, but still, I think it's a step in the good direction, a big step in the good direction. So the challenge now is to implement it. I speed up, because it's not going to be easy to implement it across the 27 member states. It will progressively enter in application. It's not yet in application. It will enter in application from November to August 2005. And yes, I think we can expect that some member states will be reluctant to do it. So that's why we will have an important role to play, to put pressure on the member states, to signal, and us organization, you can also signal to us if you see some violations, and then it will be to the Commission to put pressure on the member states. If they don't respect this binding legislation, the Commission can launch infringements proceedings.
However, this has to do with the European Union, right? So these very positive steps, I suppose, leave out a big chunk of Europe, which is something that we should underline. And also have another question that has to do with what we call the urbanization of Europe in a way, because recently there were news that Viktor Orban from Hungary, as you all know, he's quite infamous, let's say, filed a court case against the ENFA, according to what is being published, saying that the European Union has exceeded their powers and with implementing that. So I would like your comments, Scott and Elena, but also maybe Slaboj and Beata tell us a little bit about how they see this trend, since we know that also in Slovakia, this model of Viktor Orban is kind of trying to be implemented. So, yes, Elena.
Yeah, not a big fan of this model. I can say that definitely it's this populist trend that is kind of spreading. It's very, in a way, easy to captivate the minds of people with this populist rhetoric and blame the media first and foremost. and name media and press who are disclosing corruption in the government as foreign agents or as enemies or as being paid by EU or USA or whatnot. And that populist rhetoric is actually is something that is also influencing some of the countries' response to the attempt to implement universal media rights. It's like universal human rights. It's something that has to be implemented in the whole European Union. But yes, of course, there is resistance to that.
Yeah, no, you mentioned this case, and we'll see what happens. I think in many ways it's not surprising because the Hungarian government obviously isn't interested in implementing EMFA in the way that it's meant to be implemented. So we'll have to see, but this was a regulation that was supported by the legal services of the European Union, and I think, yeah, we have a serious issue with political movements in Europe that fundamentally don't accept critical media as a check on power, and that's really what I was mentioning at the beginning. That this is what should concern us. That there are political forces that fundamentally disagree and don't accept, not only don't want, but don't accept that this scrutiny comes with being in power, and they are using different methods to try to weaken the ability of media to do this, either through these types of smear campaigns, portraying media as foreign agents, as some kind of enemy, or using other models like media capture to prevent them from having influence within the media sphere and the media landscape by weakening their abilities to survive, basically.
And also we touched upon a little bit on the recent European elections. And do you see, Scott, that the results of the recent European elections show like a stabilization of the most conservative forces? That maybe gives us a bad sign for what will come next, or if those steps will continue to be implemented and be sustained.
I don't know. I don't think I would use the word conservative in this context, because I think it's more about populism and sort of in this case far right, so extremism movements. And again, I think that's where the real danger comes from movements that don't accept these democratic checks on power, of which media is a really important one. So I think that we need to be very vigilant. Yes, that is certainly a growing concern, because we see more types of governments coming into power that don't accept this and this adversarial relationship with the media. So I think it's something that we need to be following very vigilantly. At the moment, I think we still hope that the European Union will be a strong supporter of media freedom. We have these important initiatives, and we're focused, I think, on making sure that, these are legal requirements now that member states implement EMFA, for example.
We all hope so. So, Beat, I think you would like to make a comment.
Comment on the Media Freedom Act. As I mentioned, it will be very important how the European Union is able to stand up to its own values. And the autocrats are also learning to shape laws in a way that they are in harmony with the European legislation. So the EU will have to be less formalistic when judging these violations. For example, in Slovakia, maybe the law on the Slovak television, the public service television, won't violate the act, but the government still can install their own person, and they can completely take over the institutions through personal politics. So I think it's very important contextually to look at each country. And even now in Slovakia, the steps of the government are brutally violating several provisions of the European Media Freedom Act. And I think that the Union and the responsible people should not wait one more year, because in 1 year, Robert Fico can completely dismantle Slovakia's media environment. And one more comment to the platforms. Also, even though the act regulates some relationships between media and platforms, but the media is still put into a VIP client position, so we are still not partners for the platforms. And without more pressure from the European Union and I mean the countries itself on the platforms, we won't be able to move forward, and these platforms will keep using our work, and we will be in the position of all the time requesting some kind of favorable move towards us, and we won't be considered as partners in that process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Beata. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on that, but I think it's worth mentioning a little bit more about media capture as a term as well, because I feel also that this also is involved in most of the things we're talking about today. So, Elena, what is media capture? And you already told us that there is an increasing trend of media capture in Europe. And I think it might be worth mentioning a little bit more about Italy. Already Alberto has shared a lot with us about this, but you had the recent mission as well, so maybe you can tell us.
Yes, of course. So I can give an example of Italy. MFRR has been on a mission there because of the alarming, alarm bells that have been rung by the journalists there. And media capture is a really very, very threatening trend there, which is in the last 2 years has just skyrocketed, really. So what is happening there is basically public media broadcasting is being entirely captured by the ruling party, by the government, and basically RAI, this is the kind of main Italian public service broadcaster, has been hijacked, so to say, and its CEO has been replaced, and now there is kind of interference, political interference into its broadcasting, into its programming. A lot of the journalists and editors have left or have been fired. A lot of censorship just kind of happening in front of everyone. There have been protests on behalf of the journalists, on behalf of the union, UCGRI, and so far, you know, the situation is quite bad. Maybe Scott, I don't know if you wanted to add a little bit more on media capture as well.
Sure. I mean, just in general terms, like when we talk about media capture, we talk about different ways in which, or state-led media capture, like different ways in which the state is, undermining the independence of media, usually through ways of manipulating the media market. So I mentioned some of them already, basically using state money, state funds, to stack the deck against the media. So one of those ways, as I mentioned, is state advertising, for example, or even giving loans from state-owned banks, as was the case in Hungary. And then another category is misusing basically state regulatory bodies and functions. So whether it's the media regulatory body or, for example, misusing the process of approving mergers, which sounds really technical, but it's actually really important, because in Hungary what we saw is that the competition authority was politicized and allowed or refused to allow mergers of independent media to take place, while allowing fusions of pro-government media that totally changed the media landscape. You also have efforts to weaken the public broadcaster, for example, and different ways of influencing private media and private media ownership, which are not always obvious. So much of it is done through, friendly oligarchs or business people who often have cross interests, have cross ownership interests in different industries, profit from friendly relationships with the state, and have no business interest in having a critical media outlet that is, that challenges government power. So it's a mix of different factors that combined, as I said, create a media environment where independent media face huge hurdles in doing their job and staying viable, and pro-government media voices are artificially elevated.
It sounds like the whole problem is very political to me, and I would like to open this question further on to our audience as well. But first, I would like to just have a look about the illegal surveillance, which is also a method that it seems to be increasingly used also by the states and by the governments themselves. And we have also some of our colleagues here, Slavoc and Thanas as well, as he already shared, being spied, being tapped, and surveilled through these methods. So, Scott, is this the first time you've seen such methods being used in such a scale with the IPI?
Well, we've seen globally numerous cases, numerous scandals of mainly Pegasus spyware being used against journalists. And in Europe, we've also had several serious cases in Hungary and in Greece. Of journalists being targeted, being surveilled. And there are so many reasons why this surveillance is a problem. You know, obviously, it's a source protection problem. It's also a form of intimidation of journalists, harassment of journalists. It's also a physical safety issue as well. And I think what's really worrisome about these surveillance cases is that we actually see almost no accountability for either the third parties that are carrying out surveillance or governments and intelligence agencies that are conducting this surveillance. I mean, in Hungary, was ridiculous. The superficial investigations that were carried out, nobody was held accountable for what happened there. So I think that this is a real big challenge, and we're only going to see more of this probably. And as Julie mentioned, I think the EMFA includes a provision about surveillance, and I think it's really, as Julie said, a question of debate about what this means. What we wanted was a ban on the use of spyware against journalists, and what we got was something much different, which arguably actually opens the door to surveillance while putting some guardrails around it, which are, from our point of view, the absolute minimum standards that you can have. And so I think also there's a big question about what the effect of that will be.
The use of this method seems quite frightening and scary because, as you said, it affects the journalists' lives, the personal lives as well. And if anyone, Thanasis or Slavos, wants to comment that, I would love to have your comments on how does it feel, basically?
Basically, it has to do with our sources, and this is the only aspect I can set. Of course, it's a violation of our privacy. They are getting into our houses because those spywares are extremely intrusive. So the one that is using the spyware, it is the power user of your mobile phone. He can access to your camera, to your microphone, to your email, to everything, okay? So even to your bank accounts, and I'm not overtelling about it. So the fact is that we have the only way, this is a personal matter. In a professional aspect, what is important is to safeguard our sources. And this is the one thing that it is on hazard. The people that are speaking to us, okay, this is our job. The people that trust us, the people that, all the relationships that have been matured in numerous years during our professional life. And out of sudden, all these people, they are, you realize that through the period of surveillance, they found themselves under trouble. They have suffered, and they don't even know why. And the only reason is that they provide you information. For me, for coming from a financial background, and for having, for many years, active relationship with staff from the Ministry of Finance, from the banking sector. So I realized that people that have been active sources of mine during my surveillance have suffered, as I said. So this is a tangible example about how many troubles and how those people that your sources can suffer from your surveillance, because at the same time there have been other surveillance too. So it is an explosive thing. And I believe that the one thing that we have to be extremely persist is the accountability. We cannot be naive. There is a need of the spyware technology in order to safeguard our societies. Okay, but you have to use it in a very disciplined and specific way in order to know who is the end user of the spyware and to put him accountable for any maltreatment and use of this technology. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Thanasi. We will soon open for questions to the audience, and I would like to already tell you that I have a question to you, because I know many journalists are among the audience. If you have witnessed such cases of press freedom violations, or if you have faced yourselves, it would be interesting to discuss. So have a thought about it, and I will come to you in a bit. But first, Julie, we read recently that based on let's say, a comparison between the RSF index and the Economist Democracy Index, there is a relation, a connection between the press freedom and democracy, and the quality of democracy. Could you tell us a little bit more about this? And do you think that this could be a good start to see what our next steps should be in terms of fighting press freedom violations?
Yeah, so the correlation between press freedom and the strength of democracy is not really a surprise. It's important to have this study and to see that it is confirmed by the study. It's always good to have some facts to prove that there is a correlation. What our latest index shows is that journalism is under political pressure, and it's, how can I say? We see that today journalists are not seen as a part of democracy. They are seen as an opponent, an adversary, and this is really problematic. So, and I think as well that the other big issue that we haven't really discussed it, because we focused on the safety of journalists and the attacks they are having, but I think that what is really changing also is social networks, platforms, the way that we receive information, and also disinformation, and all that is used also by politicians, by government, and it is kind of a chaos, an informational chaos, and I think that's really a question that we should and the EU should address more deeply.
Mm-hmm. And I just heard that journalists, they are considered part of the system, which is very discouraging. We're gonna talk a little bit more about this further on, but first, anyone from the audience that has a question, either to our experts here or the journalists, and also, as I said, if any of the journalists in the audience wants to share an experience. Is the gentleman right there? Two of them.
Thank you. It's Nick Williams from Index on Censorship. Just from the work of MFR and all the organizations here, one of the things that we've been worried about is the sort of normalization of some of these threats. If the state doesn't respond, journalists see online threats or physical threats as part of the price they have to pay to continue to be journalists. In your experience, how can that normalization be countered? Because it also then affects the ability of journalists to speak out, to acknowledge something as a threat. And how can we ensure that normalization doesn't happen? Because I think that's a real challenge, I think.
And your question is to address to?
To everyone.
Thank you. Yes, you're right. It has happened, and we observe it that in many countries, journalists are not even reporting on threats, especially online threats against them, because they think, oh, there are worse places, there are other journalists who are physically attacked, or there are countries where things are even worse, so we won't complain. And that's really something that we discourage them to do. We tell them, no, please complain to us. Any attack is an attack. And online attacks are as serious as attacks in real life, because online has become our real physical world. You know, death threats online are just as dangerous as, you know, when it's spoken in real life. So it is what we can do about that, and what we can do to try to denormalize the situation is, as our organizations, as Media Freedom Rapid Response Consortium, we always speak to journalists. We encourage them, first of all, to report anything. We have Mapping Media Freedom platform where we are documenting all violations against press and media freedom. And it could be a so to say, small thing, like you're not being let into the conference, but indeed it is a big thing. It is, you know, access to information. It is some threat online, you know, on social media. It affects your life, and it obstructs your ability to continue journalistic work. And of course, it's also organizations like ours that we encourage journalists to ask for help and not feel bad about that. You know, you are entitled to psychological help, medical help. We have Journalism in Residence program where we can allow journalists to escape for a couple of months from their oppressive environment and spend some time in Germany and just, you know, network, work in calm and peace. And we really do encourage, we try to engage with journalists as much as possible and provide them this help and support them. And we're here, you know, and we're in this together. So that's, you know, we do what we can.
Great work, Helena. Thank you. And Scott?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, kind of jumping off on this point, that globally, the path towards normalizing attacks on journalists is a lack of accountability for attacks on journalists, is impunity. And I think that this is something I also wanted to say earlier, that we're also at a dangerous moment, I think, in Europe in terms of normalizing serious physical attacks on journalists. And we know, I think many of us know these statistics, these global statistics, that 95, 99% of killings of journalists, of serious physical attacks on journalists, go unpunished. We've had several murders of journalists over the past several years in Europe, and we are repeating those patterns, that the masterminds behind these killings are not being punished. And I think this is really serious, and I think it undermines Europe's role as a beacon of the rule of law. It's a rule of law issue as well, to ensure that those who commit crimes, including crimes against journalists, are brought to justice.
This is why we did this panel today, to highlight exactly this trend. And I think the gentleman right there has the microphone.
Καλησπέρα. Θα μπορούσα να κάνω την ερώτηση στα ελληνικά.
We would prefer in English, but if you feel more comfortable, I can translate for you.
Ωραία. Λοιπόν, ήθελα να ρωτήσω, επειδή είπατε κάποια στιγμή ότι η παράδοση είναι ο λόγος που η Τουρκία συνεχίζει να βρίσκεται σε μια έρευνα που αφορά την ελευθερία του τύπου. Είναι αρκετά ως λόγος αυτός για να βλέπουμε την Τουρκία σε μια ευρωπαϊκή έρευνα? Γιατί από ό,τι είδαμε όλα τα άλλα κράτη είναι ευρωπαϊκά κράτη. Η Τουρκία, από όσο γνωρίζουμε, δεν είναι ευρωπαϊκό κράτος. Αυτή είναι η μία ερώτηση.
Can you repeat, μπορείτε να επαναλάβετε την αρχή της ερώτησης?
Ναι, στην έρευνα που είδαμε, στο πρώτο slide, η Τουρκία, αν δεν κάνω λάθος, ήταν μέσα στις χώρες που περιλάμβανε η ελευθερία του τύπου. Γιατί? Είπατε ότι είναι παραδοσιακά μια χώρα που μπαίνει στις έρευνες, αλλά είναι η παράδοση αρκετός λόγος, λέω, για να είναι μια χώρα εκτός Ευρώπης μέσα σε μια ευρωπαϊκή έρευνα. Αυτή είναι η μία ερώτηση. Και η άλλη είναι, αν γνωρίζετε αν υπάρχει στην Ελλάδα κάποιος φορέας που συνδέει ανεξάρτητους δημοσιογράφους, υποστηρίζει ανεξάρτητους δημοσιογράφους, γιατί οι δύο ενώσεις ουσιαστικά των δημοσιογράφων στην Ελλάδα, οι δύο βασικές ενώσεις, έχουν μέλη τα οποία προφανώς δεν είναι ανεξάρτητοι δημοσιογράφοι.
Yes. Well, the first question was based also on the map that you showed in the beginning, Elena, and it's about Turkey. And the question is, why do we actually show Turkey belonging in Europe? And if this tradition is quite a reason for that. In my opinion, it's a geographical thing. Sometimes we see it being part of this research because it's very near to Europe. But Elena, do you want to comment why do you include it in your European research?
Yeah, I mean, it's simple. Our mandate is covering countries that are members of the European Union and countries candidates.
Exactly. Είναι μια υποψήφια χώρα προς ένταξη. It's a candidate, European candidate country. Now, about the other question was if in Greece there are entities and organizations that support independent journalists, because the association, let's say the official associations that we have so far historically does not support in a way or does not cover the need we have as independent journalists. And I would like to answer you to that in 6 minutes there will be a meeting right behind the stage. The media village is right behind the stage, as Stratis mentioned in the beginning. There are 18 organizations, including Greek ones, that support journalism. And I think you are in the right place because you will find many ways and many entities and many organizations that support and show solidarity to Greek independent journalists. So stay around and you will have your answer there. So I can see we have 5 more minutes. I just want to have a quick question to you myself, because we already mentioned normalization of the violence, let's say, against journalists. And also, Julie, this is something that worries me a lot generally and worries us all, I think, that the journalists themselves, they are in a way considered part of the system in a bad way. I mean, we see even people don't trust journalists. 2 years ago in the IMED forum, we also had the chance to see that through a research we conducted. And as everybody knows, the trust for journalism in general has been very, very low lately. So my question would be if the audience, so the people basically, tolerate this kind of violence against journalists, and what does this mean for the future? Whoever wants to start.
Yeah, I think the mistrust of citizens, of people, is a growing concern. I mean, I can feel it every day, even from friends. They are suspicious, and a lot, I mean, part of it is linked with the social network, the disinformation, everything is put into doubt. It's good to check your information, but now the disinformation has this effect that it also put into question everything, journalism and disinformation. And that's exactly what the people who are behind seek. It's to destabilize this. So I think that is a real problem, this mistrust. And maybe also journalists have some obligation and have to think about how they work, how they communicate, and try to find some ways to regain this trust, because it is, yes, at the heart of democracy.
Thank you. Elena.
Yeah, I agree. I would just add that I think the combination of growing populist rhetoric and proliferation of social media, online technologies, they undermined uncontrolled, growth of sources of information. They undermine the very trust in truth and in facts. We have alternative truths now, alternative facts. This is hijacked by the populist politicians who are relying on emotions rather than facts. And then I think what is important, the way to address it is media literacy. I think we have to address media literacy in populations and educate people on how to find the correct information, the sources, how to go to the trustworthy journalists and media. We have to, unfortunately, and journalists also have to educate the population. Unfortunately, it's the job that we all have to do.
Thank you. And Scott and Julie, you want to add something after Scott?
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, I think generally I agree. Like, of course, we could spend, like, I think days talking about trust in media, and there's also organic, like, distrust in media, and again, we could discuss why that is all over. But I think as press freedom organizations, we're focused on understanding why and how populists and other forces are trying to take advantage of this, destabilize the situation further, and create this distrust. This is what is happening in many cases, and destabilize, as Julie said, the media landscape. So that is what we are focused on and trying to combat.
Thank you. Yes, just a quick
one
word.
I think that one thing which really need to be done is to regulate the platform and the way the algorithmic system of the platform works. Because that's the recommender system, it's AI, so we have to regulate AI and generated AI in the field of information. For me, that's really, otherwise we will never manage to rebuild the trust.
Thank you very much. I think this is all the time we have. So I would like to thank you, Elena, Julie, and Scott, and also, of course, express my gratitude to Thanasis, Alberto, Slavoc, Ariane, Bojana, and Beata for being here with us. I would also like to extend a very big thank you to the Uncovered and the IG4U team for helping us out with the session, and also the European Press Prize team for suggestions and advice. Many exciting sessions follow, so stay with us. Thank you.